I don't make empty threats. I make vows and I always keep them. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 31, and I run a small but thriving architecture firm out of Chicago. I built it with blistered hands, caffeine-fueled nights, and a willpower that didn't know how to quit. For as long as I can remember, my family treated me less like a daughter and more like a convenient safety net. Every emergency, my savings. Every dream, my credit line. Every time they said, "We're proud of you," it was followed by, "Can you help us just one more time?" For years, I told myself it was love, that this is what family does. But that illusion shattered the day I walked into my parents' lawyer's office. It was supposed to be routine. A simple reading of the will, a chance to understand how their estate, decades of hard work, a paid-off house, investments, family heirlooms would be handled. I wasn't expecting anything extravagant. I had my own life, my own business. I just wanted a sign that I mattered. But what I got was a message carved out of eyes. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of their legacy had been left to my younger brother, Ethan. My name didn't appear once. Not a mention. Not even a token photograph or a keepsake. It was as if I never existed. And just like that, I stopped being their daughter. That was the moment I became their reckoning. Before I take you back to the beginning, to the moments that built this betrayal brick by brick, make sure you're subscribed. Because this isn't just a story about money. It's about recognition. It's about how love can rot when it's not returned. And most of all, it's about how one woman decided she would never, ever be invisible again. I grew up in a postcard suburb just outside Chicago. Maple trees, cul-de-sacs, and houses that all looked like they'd been copy-pasted from a catalog. From the outside, we were the perfect family. Inside, love had a direction and it flowed only one way. I was the checklist child. Straight A's, perfect attendance, the one who remembered birthdays and folded the laundry without being asked. Ethan? He was the headline. Charming, reckless, the boy who just needed another chance. Attention clung to him like static electricity. Teachers adored his potential. Relatives excused his mistakes. My achievements, on the other hand, barely made a ripple. I remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I'd just been accepted into a top-tier architecture program on scholarship. We went out for dinner, a small booth at Applebee's. A $50 gift card slid across the table like a tax return. 2 weeks later, Ethan's soccer team won state regionals. My parents threw a backyard party for 80 people. A live DJ, catered food, a new car with a bow on top. It wasn't about the money. It was about the energy, the pride, the joy they reserved only for him. College only widened the gap. My scholarship covered tuition, but not everything else. I worked mornings at a cafe and nights shelving books at the library. Weekends, I took construction jobs, learning how to hold a drill before I even learned how to parallel park. Ethan, he barely scraped through community college before transferring to a private school. His tuition, housing, meal plans, even his beer money were paid for without hesitation. One night, exhausted from a double shift, I asked my dad why they covered everything for him but not for me. "Ethan needs more help," he said. "You're independent, Clara. You've always been so capable." That word independent locked me in a cage I never asked for. My strength became the excuse for their neglect. Their favoritism was rebranded as logic. Sunday dinners became unbearable. Every week, Ethan's new business idea took center stage. His stories, his dreams, his failures, all treated like milestones. When I spoke, it felt like background noise between dessert and dishes. I didn't want their money. I wanted their fairness. And I never got it. I graduated with honors and debt. He graduated with mediocrity and applause. But I kept going. I launched Bennett Design and Build from the corner of a shared office above a hardware store. The walls were damp. The carpet smelled like sawdust and disappointment. But it was mine. I slept there more nights than I care to admit, curled up under blueprints and empty ramen cups. My hands blistered from hauling lumber by day and sketching drafts by night. Slowly, painfully, I built a business from nothing but ambition and grit. And still, I answered every call from home. When Dad needed heart surgery, I wrote a $25,000 check without blinking. When their roof caved in, I covered the repairs. When Ethan wanted to start a podcast and ask for $8,000, I gave him the loan. He never paid it back. The worst part? They never even said thank you. Gratitude became expectation. My help became tradition. And deep down, I convinced myself that all of it, every sacrifice, every dollar would mean something someday. That when the estate was finally settled, the ledger would balance. That they'd see me, but they didn't. The day I stepped into that lawyer's office, all the illusions burned away. The will wasn't just a legal document, it was a confession. It told me I was never the priority. I was the fallback, the fixer, the provider. Ethan shifted in his chair, wearing a watch I knew he hadn't paid for. My mother adjusted her pearls and smiled through her guilt. My father couldn't meet my eyes. "Clara," the attorney said, "your parents have decided that all assets, the house, the accounts, the insurance will pass to Ethan." That was it. No heirlooms, no trust fund, not even the family photo albums. I wasn't their daughter. I was their contingency plan. And now that they didn't need one, they'd erase me completely. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. I had built everything I owned from the ground up. And now, I would build something even stronger. Boundaries. Because the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. People think betrayal is loud slammed doors, shouted words, courtroom battles. They're wrong. Real betrayal is quiet. It's polite smiles across a dinner table. It's "we're so proud of you" followed by "can you help us again?" And it's a legal document that reduces your entire existence to a footnote. I drove home from that meeting numb. Not angry, not yet, just empty. Chicago's skyline blurred past my windshield as I replayed every sacrifice I'd ever made, every dollar I'd sent, every time I'd convinced myself it was all for love. The truth was uglier. I'd been financing my own erasure. Growing up, I told myself that if I worked hard enough, they'd see me, that maybe one day, I'd be worthy of the same love Ethan got for free. But that's not how it works. When people learn you'll show up no matter how little they give you, they stop trying. It started small. When Mom's car broke down, I paid for the repairs. When Dad's business took a loss, I floated them alone. When Ethan couldn't make rent, I covered it twice. Then it became automatic. Monthly mortgage payment, $2,600. Emergency roof replacement, $11,000. Dad's surgery, $25,000. Ethan's failed startup, $18,000. Christmas, birthdays, bailouts. I stopped counting. By the time I was 31, I'd poured over $160,000 into that family, more than enough for a second home or a fully funded retirement account. And I told myself it was okay. I told myself family comes first. But what happens when you're never family's first? The night after the will reading, I sat alone in my office. The city outside hummed with life, neon signs blinking, trains rattling by, but inside, silence pressed down like a weight. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. At the top, I typed a title in bold: "The Ledger of Sacrifice." Line by line, I wrote it all down: every payment, every transfer, every sacrifice. I added dates, amounts, even the reasons they gave me. By the time I was done, the total was over $187,000. And that wasn't even including the time, the nights I stayed up worrying about their bills instead of chasing my own dreams. The opportunities I turned down to help them. The relationships I'd lost because family always came first. Looking at that spreadsheet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not anger. Not vengeance. Power. Because now I had proof, undeniable, unshakable proof that I had been more than generous. That I had earned more than they ever gave me. And for the first time, I asked myself a dangerous question. What would happen if I stopped? The answer came the next morning. "Clara," Mom said on the phone, her tone syrupy sweet. "Just a reminder, the mortgage payment is due this Friday." I stared at the skyline outside my window. "Not my mortgage," I said calmly. A pause. "I don't understand." "I'm not covering it anymore." The silence stretched until it cracked. "We count on you," she whispered, as if I was being cruel. "We can't do this without your help." "That's the problem," I said. "You were never supposed to." By noon, my phone was a war zone. "Dad, this childish behavior stops now. You have responsibilities." "Mom, the bank will foreclose." "Fix this before PM, Ethan." No message. Because of course he didn't. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Maya, my financial advisor, and logged down every account. No more automatic transfers. No more shared credit cards. No more open doors for them to walk through without knocking. Next, I called Olivia, an attorney friend, and explained the situation. "Document everything," she said. "If they harass you, you have options, including a restraining order." It felt surreal. These were my parents, my brother, and yet, the people I loved most were the ones who had taken the most and now felt entitled to keep taking. The campaign escalated fast. My mother called distant relatives, painting me as ungrateful, selfish, unstable. My father hinted to my clients that I was under a lot of stress. Ethan showed up at my office unannounced, smirking. "You're really going to ruin the family over money?" "It's not about money," I said. "It's about respect. Whatever helps you sleep at night," he muttered, walking out like he was the victim. I didn't chase him. I didn't explain myself. Instead, I printed my ledger every transaction, every sacrifice, and shared it with a handful of extended family members. No dramatic speeches, just facts. Aunt Laura read it twice, then called everyone else. Within a week, the whispers stopped, the pity dried up, and the narrative shifted. I wasn't the selfish daughter, I was the exhausted one who had been carrying too much for too long. 2 months later, the inevitable happened. The bank issued a formal notice. Missed mortgage payments. Outstanding debt. The house, their precious house, was on the line. And for the first time in his life, Ethan had to work. His latest business collapsed under its own weight, and he took a part-time job at a hardware store to make ends meet. He hated every second of it. Mom started selling jewelry online. Dad applied for consulting gigs. And little by little, reality, the one I had shielded them from, started to close in. They showed up at one of my construction sites one afternoon, eyes red and voices trembling. "Please, Clara," Mom begged. "We're going to lose everything." "Then maybe," I said quietly, "you'll understand what it felt like to give up everything for people who never noticed." Dad's voice hardened. "We're still your family," I nodded. "And family respects boundaries. If you can't do that, you're not welcome here." They left, stunned by the line I'd finally drawn, a line they could no longer cross. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of coffee and watched the city lights flicker. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I had money in the bank or because justice had been served, but because I had reclaimed something much more valuable. Myself. I wasn't their provider anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their solution. I was Clara Bennett, and I was done being erased. The thing about cutting people off is this: they never believe you'll really do it. They think you'll cave. They think guilt will eat you alive. They think the same heart they've been leaning on will be too soft to stop. But weeks passed, and I didn't cave. The transfer stayed cancelled. The calls went unanswered. The door, the one they used to walk through like it was theirs, stayed locked, and the fallout began. First, there was denial. They acted like nothing had changed. Mom left cheery voicemails about Sunday dinner. Dad emailed me a reminder about the property tax deadline. Ethan sent me a link to a GoFundMe for his failing bar with the caption, "Share this, family supports family." I ignored them all. Then came anger. Voicemails turned into accusations. "You're selfish. You're tearing this family apart. You'll regret this when we're gone." It hurt, of course it did, but I refused to let their words become my chains again. Every insult was a sign that the control they'd had over me was slipping. And when control slips, truth shows its teeth. By month 3, the mortgage was officially delinquent. Late fees stacked on top of late fees. The once immaculate lawn of my childhood home grew wild and overgrown. A for sale sign went up on the front yard, not because they wanted to sell, but because they had to. For the first time in my life, my parents were living in reality, a world where actions had consequences, and money didn't fall from my bank account like magic. Ethan's bar, the sure thing that was supposed to make him a millionaire, sputtered out. The foot traffic wasn't there. The investors pulled out, and by spring, it was shuttered for good. He had to get a job, a real one. Not networking, not exploring opportunities. A job with a name tag and a manager who didn't care about his last name. It was poetic. Almost. Watching the people who had once called me too strong to need help learn how to survive without mine. But they didn't just struggle. They lashed out. One afternoon, as I was leaving a client meeting downtown, I saw them. Mom, Dad, and Ethan waiting by my car. "Clara," Mom started, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I sighed. "This isn't the place. It's the only place you'll see us," Dad snapped. "You've ignored every call, every message." "Because I've said everything I need to say," I replied. "You're being cruel," Mom said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We're going to lose everything. You already lost me," I said softly. "The rest? That's on you," Ethan scoffed. "You're seriously going to let your family fall apart over money?" I looked him in the eye. "It was never about money, Ethan. It's about respect. And you've shown me none." He stepped closer, lowering his voice like a threat. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Just because you made something of yourself?" "No," I said. "I think I'm free. I walked away without looking back. Their shouts echoed down the parking garage, but I didn't stop. For the first time, their anger didn't pull me back, it pushed me forward. The smear campaign followed soon after. Mom called distant relatives, crying into the phone about how ungrateful I'd become. Dad hinted to a potential client that I was emotionally unstable. Ethan posted cryptic quotes online about fake family and success-changing people. But here's the thing about lies. They crumble under the weight of receipts. I sent my ledger of sacrifice to the few family members who still spoke to them. Every payment, every loan, every bailout. I attached bank statements and screenshots. I didn't add commentary. I didn't have to. The numbers spoke louder than their narrative ever could. Aunt Laura called me the next day. "Clara," she said quietly. "I had no idea." "I know," I replied. "They made sure you didn't." Soon, the whispers stopped. The pity dried up. And for the first time, people stopped asking why I had cut them off and started asking why they had taken so much. By month 5, my parents sold the house. The bank was circling, and they had no choice. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real in reality. I'd learned was the best teacher. Ethan moved back in with them. The golden boy, now jobless and angry, spent his nights blaming me for a future he'd wasted himself. But life didn't pause for their resentment. Mine certainly didn't. My business was thriving. We just landed our biggest contract yet, a luxury high-rise project that would double our revenue. For the first time, I wasn't building for someone else. I was building for me. And yet, there were nights when guilt crept in. Nights when I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd gone too far. If I was heartless. If I was still a good daughter. But then I'd remember the will. I'd remember the mortgage. I'd remember the years of sacrifice that were dismissed with a sentence. "You're independent. You don't need help." And the guilt would fade. Then, something unexpected happened. One rainy Tuesday morning, an envelope arrived at my office. No return address, just my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a letter. Short, honest, devastating. "Clara, we failed you. We took without giving. We excused our favoritism as logic and our dependence as love. We see that now. We are sorry, truly sorry." Dad, I stared at those words for a long time. For years, I had dreamed of hearing them. Now that they were here, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like relief, like a wound finally beginning to heal. But forgiveness? That would take time. And it would come on my terms. Weeks turned into months. My parents learned how to live within their means. My mother got a job as a teacher's aide. My father consulted part-time. Ethan, humbled by the real world, started a small landscaping business when he actually worked for. And slowly, without apology as a weapon or guilt as a leash, our family began to talk again. Not about money, not about obligation, just about life. But things were different now. The dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the provider anymore. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the safety net. I was Clara Bennett. And this time, they saw me. They say time heals everything. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal anything. Choices do. And the choice to heal, to forgive, to rebuild is harder than any betrayal I've ever survived. It had been nearly a year since I'd walked out of that lawyer's office. A year since the will erased my name. A year since I'd cut the financial cord that had kept my family tethered to me like a lifeline. In that year, everything changed. My parents were no longer the king and queen of comfort. Their new apartment was modest: 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a second-hand couch. The dining table where they once hosted lavish Sunday dinners was now a small foldable one from a thrift store. And Ethan, the golden boy with endless chances? He was working full-time for a landscaping company, hauling soil, trimming hedges, sweating under the sun. For the first time in his life, he was accountable for something more than excuses. But the most profound change wasn't their circumstances. It was their perspective. It started with small gestures. A text from Mom on my birthday, not asking for anything, just wishing me happiness. A voicemail from Dad congratulating me on a big business milestone. A handwritten note from Ethan tucked into my mailbox. "I'm trying. I know I've been selfish. Thank you for forcing me to grow up." I didn't respond at first. I wasn't ready. But I kept those messages. And every time I read them, I felt the edges of my anger soften just a little. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's not something you decide on a Tuesday afternoon and complete by Wednesday morning. It's a process, slow, uneven, and deeply personal. 3 months after that first letter, Dad called and asked if we could meet for coffee. Just to talk, he said. No expectations. I hesitated, then agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. The man who once stood so certain now stared into his cup like it held the answers he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. I'm sorry, he said before I even sat down, for all of it. I didn't reply. I just let him speak. We thought we were doing what was best. We thought Ethan needed more help. We thought you were strong enough to handle less. He sighed. But the truth is, we didn't think at all. We just took. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. No raised voices. Just honesty, raw and overdue. I don't expect you to forgive us, he continued. But I want you to know that we see it now. All the sacrifices. All the ways we failed you. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't defending, justifying, or dismissing. He was owning it. And that was enough for me to say, quietly, I know. After that, things shifted. Slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild. Coffee with Dad became a weekly ritual. Sometimes we talked about business, sometimes about childhood memories, sometimes about nothing at all. Mom started calling just to chat, no hidden agenda, no financial undertones. And Ethan, the brother who had once rolled his eyes at my boundaries, began showing up differently. He asked for advice instead of money. He celebrated my successes without comparing them to his failures. He even apologized, face to face, for how entitled he'd been. I didn't realize how much you were doing, he said one afternoon. I thought money just happened. I didn't understand what it cost you. Most people don't, I replied, until they have to earn it themselves. He nodded. I do now. But even as the walls started to come down, I never forgot why I'd built them in the first place. I made it clear. The era of blind generosity was over. There would be no more bailouts, no more emergency transfers, no more Clara will handle it. Our relationships would be built on mutual respect, not dependence. And to my surprise, they respected that. In fact, something beautiful happened once money left the equation. Love finally had room to breathe. Family dinners, once suffocating performances of gratitude and guilt, became simple, honest gatherings. We cooked together, laughed about old memories, even disagreed without manipulation hiding beneath the surface. It was still awkward sometimes. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But every small moment, every conversation, every apology, every shared silence laid a new brick in the foundation we were creating from scratch. Then, one afternoon, Mom called and asked to meet. We have something we want to talk to you about, she said. In person. We met at their apartment, a modest, tidy space with a tiny balcony overlooking a busy street. Over tea, Dad cleared his throat and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a deed to a small condo they had purchased after selling the house. We want you to have a share in this, Dad said. Not because we owe you, because we want to. It's not much, but it's something. I stared at the paper. Years ago, this gesture would have felt like too little too late. But now, it felt like something more valuable than property. Acknowledgement. I don't need this, I said. We know. Mom smiled gently. But we want you to know that this family isn't about taking anymore. It's about giving too. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, not because of the condo, but because of the growth it represented. By the time spring rolled around, the Bennetts looked nothing like the family they once were. Dad worked 3 days a week as a consultant and actually enjoyed it. Mom volunteered at an elementary school library. Ethan's landscaping business had picked up enough clients for him to hire a small team. And me? I was engaged. His name was Liam. And he loved me for who I was, not for what I provided. Our wedding plans were simple, intimate, honest, just like the life I was finally building. When I told my parents about the engagement, their reaction wasn't overblown or transactional. It was joyful, pure. They offered to help with the reception, and when I said no, they didn't push. They simply said, "We're happy for you." And for the first time in my life, I believed them. I learned something important through all of this. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. It's about choosing peace over punishment, not for them, but for you. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I still remember the will, the mortgage, the betrayal. But now, those memories don't control me. They don't define me. I define me. The day of my wedding arrived with the kind of stillness that follows a storm. The air clearer, the sky brighter, the world quieter. It wasn't just the start of a marriage. It was the culmination of everything I had fought for. Respect, independence, and the right to choose my own path. The ceremony was simple. A small garden by the water, 50 people at most. Friends, colleagues, a few distant relatives, and against all odds my parents and Ethan. They sat quietly in the second row, dressed modestly. No trace of entitlement or expectation on their faces. Just presence. Just love. As I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with my best friend, I caught my father's eyes. They weren't proud in the old performative way. They were grateful. My mother clutched a tissue, already crying before the vows even began. And Ethan, the same brother who once believed everything was his by birthright, was the loudest when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. I wasn't walking into a fairy tale. I was walking into something real, a life I had built on my own terms. After the reception, as the last of the guests left and the fairy light swayed gently in the breeze, Dad approached me. His hands shook slightly, and I realized he'd rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times. "Clara," he said softly, "I need to say something before you go." I nodded, curious. I used to think being a father meant providing, deciding, directing. I thought love was measured in control. His eyes glistened. But I was wrong. Love is measured in respect, and I didn't respect you enough. "I see that now." Mom stepped beside him, her voice trembling. "We failed you in ways that will haunt us. But watching you today, seeing the life you've built, we're so proud. Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are." For a long time, I had imagined this conversation, and in those imaginings, I was cold, distant, untouchable. But standing there, I felt something else. Peace. "I forgive you," I said simply, not because they had earned it, not because they had asked for it the right way, but because I deserved to let go. We hugged a real hug, not the brittle, polite kind we'd perfected over the years. And in that embrace, I felt decades of resentment dissolve into something lighter. Not gone, not forgotten, but no longer heavy. Later that night, Liam and I sat on the edge of the pier, shoes off, feet dangling above the water. The stars stretched endlessly above us. "You did something brave today," he said. "What's that?" "You let them back in, without losing yourself." I smiled. I learned the hard way that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it define the future. Months passed and life unfolded in gentle, deliberate chapters. My business grew. I opened a second office in another state. Mom called every Sunday not to ask for anything, but to check in. Dad started mentoring young professionals, using the lessons he learned, including the ones I taught him, to help others avoid the same mistakes. And Ethan surprised me most of all. He started a nonprofit for teens aging out of foster care. "Everyone deserves a shot at building a future," he said when I asked why. "You taught me that we weren't the picture-perfect family on a holiday card. But we were real. We had scars. Yes, but we had growth too." One afternoon, a few months after the wedding, I received a letter from my parents. Handwritten, no demands, no hidden motives. It read, "We used to believe legacy was about wealth, inheritance, and things we could pass down. But you've taught us that legacy is about lessons. You taught us resilience. You taught us accountability. You taught us that love without respect is not love at all. Thank you for being our greatest teacher. Love, Mom and Dad." I read it 3 times before setting it down. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not of sadness, not even of joy, but of something deeper. Completion. Years ago, the idea of them leaving me nothing would have broken me. Today, I realized they had given me something far more valuable. They had given me clarity about who I am, what I deserve, and what I will no longer accept. They had given me strength forged in betrayal, sharpened by boundaries. And they had given me freedom to write my own story, unburdened by guilt or expectation. Money fades. Inheritance disappears. But the lessons we fight for, the dignity we reclaim, the self-worth we rediscover, those last forever. I sometimes think back to that lawyer's office, the polished wood, the thick will on the table, the stunned silence when I realized my name wasn't in it. I used to see that day as the moment everything ended. Now I see it as the moment everything began. Because if they had given me what I expected, I would have never learned what I deserved. If they had handed me wealth, I would have never built my own. If they had never betrayed me, I would have never met the strongest version of myself. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance of all, the one we create when the world gives us nothing. As I stood by the window of my office one evening, city lights stretching endlessly beneath me, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Dinner this weekend? No agenda, just family." I smiled. My answer came easily. Wouldn't miss it. I turned off the phone, breathed deeply, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Wholeness. Because this was never a story about money. It was a story about identity, boundaries, and becoming. And in the end, it wasn't that they left me nothing, it's that I discovered I was everything I needed all along. If this story touched your heart, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your worth is never defined by what you inherit. It's defined by what you become.